All right. So it's been almost 4 years since I quote unquote fired the man, and I left my job. And it's been an awesome ride ever since. And it's always fun bringing people on who like to talk about that topic and how you can create your own life. And so we're going to have an interesting conversation about business, creating your own life, and all that fun stuff in the e-commerce world. So I'm super excited to have on Ken Wilson and David Schomer from the Firing the Man podcast. So welcome, gentlemen. Welcome back, I should say.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's an honor to be a second time guest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
Definitely excited to have you guys. You guys were episode 80. So this is going to be 150 something of the podcast. So you guys are so it means I'm about twice the number of episodes through almost from when you guys were last on. And a lot has changed in the world, although a lot has stayed the same. But I guess that's kind of the way the world goes in general.
Yes. It's been a while. You said a year and a half, Kevin?
Yeah, well, it would have been almost 2 years. So it would have been fall of 2020. And so here we are. It's fall of 2022. So it's been about 2 years.
Yeah, 2 years. Absolutely. A lot has changed.
Yes, a lot has changed. A lot has changed in our own lives. A lot of things are different. So just real quick, who are you guys? And then we'll get into kind of what has transpired the last couple of years with you guys and where things are heading. But let's just start with who are you guys for those who have not listened to maximizingecommerce.com/80 to listen to episode 80.
Yeah, I can give a brief introduction, then I'll kick it over to Ken. So Ken and I started the Firing the Man podcast. We have been in the e-commerce world for 6 or 7 years. And for most of that time, we were employed. Ken was an engineer and I worked at an accounting firm. And our end game was to fire the man, to quit our jobs and do this full time. And so on our podcast, we have documented that process. And we can get into this a little bit more later, but we have both successfully fired the man and are self-employed. Thank you. And in our professional lives, we run 80/20 Capital, which is a holding company for several different brands. Our sweet spot's Amazon. We recently have expanded into the international marketplaces with the help of Kevin, by the way, and also have WordPress websites and are selling on Walmart. So yeah, it's a little bit about us.
Awesome. So if I remember correctly, when you guys were on episode 80, you hadn't both fired the man yet. So congratulations on making that leap of faith. What was it like? I guess I can say to both of you, since you started the Firing the Man podcast, still being with the man, so to speak.
Yes.
You're still at the job, I should say, maybe differently.
Yeah. So that's interesting that you brought it up. And a lot of our guests, we were talking to them, and it's kind of like, you get that like imposter syndrome feeling, like, oh, it's the podcast is called Firing the Man, and still working for the man. And so the whole, the process, the concept behind that was like starting that podcast and then kind of sharing with everyone our process of doing that, because that was our goal. And so I believe the last time we were on the show 2 years ago, I think I was just a few months. I just had fired the man like a few months prior. And so it was very new for me. And then since then, probably, I don't know, 3 or 5 months later after we were on the show, David fired the man as well. And like David mentioned earlier, just kind of on our podcast, we share our story on how we did that, why we did that, and a little bit of tidbits as well. So, but yeah, over to David.
Yeah. So if you go back to the starting of our podcast, we had to come up with a name. And Ken was the one that threw out Firing the Man. And I remember thinking, like, it's kind of an abrasive title if my boss were to bring up. And
yeah, I was about to say, like, that's pretty gutsy when you still have a job.
Yeah.
For the people signing your checks.
Yeah. And so I was full-time employed for, it would have been 15 months while we had this podcast. And that entire time I felt like I had a giant secret. And really two secrets. One, I have this podcast about quitting my job, so I'm not going to be here for a while.
Kind of showing your cards.
Right. And number two was I have this other business that I'm running before work and over my lunch hour. This business has employees, and I was still doing my best at work, but in terms of like going the extra mile, I really wasn't. I was doing what was asked of me, and then going home and working on this side hustle so I could ultimately fire the man. And I'll add to this. We started the podcast. 6 months later, Ken quits, and I was like, "Oh shit, man, Ken's serious about this. Ken is serious about this. He's putting his money where his mouth is." And I'm a pretty risk averse person, which is what attracted me to the accounting field. It's a very stable, or what I believe to be a fairly stable position. And
there's always debits and credits.
Always. Oh, there's always going to be a job for bean counters. And so, anyway, yeah, the pressure was on. One of us had fired the man, the other hadn't. And Ken was incredibly supportive, all the way through my process. And it was helpful to see somebody go through that, and that life on the other side of full-time employment for somebody else, that it works.
Okay. So let's take a little step back to this time period. So, sounds like one of you was more risk averse than the other, understandably so. What advice would you have to someone who's maybe either looking to pull the trigger or is aspirational about one day leaving their job? Like, what advice would you have for them to decide when is the right time, and how do they make that decision? Because it can be hard to let go of the stable paycheck.
Sure. So I'll take first crack, and then I'll kick it over to David. And so, now looking from the other side of that decision and executing, 3 years ago, it was, the way I put it together, and David said it right. Like I'm way more risky. I'll take more risks. I'm in a different chapter of my life, a little older than David, and so I'll take more risk, whereas David is more cautious and everything. And so I think depending on what kind of your personality is really where your plan should be. But at a say a 10,000 foot view, I kind of saw this as four pillars, if you will. One is have a backup plan. Or and if you have a corporate job now, you always have a backup plan, because at the end of the day, you can always just go back and do what you were doing. And so the three things that kind of jumped out at me was replacing my corporate and my salary. And so how am I going to replace my salary? And so you need to make sure that if you're in e-commerce, so you need to make sure your business is large enough to where you can draw a salary from it and not drain the business or not stunt the growth. Another piece was insurance. And that was probably one of the hardest things for me, is figuring out the insurance piece, kind of, believe it or not. But it took me a little bit, but there's lots of resources out there to get insurance. And then, I think those two there, as well as having a security blanket. Now, depending on who you talk to, or how much finance background you have, you want to have like a nest egg to 6 months living expenses, I think, is kind of the standard thing. And so I've kind of put all those together and said, okay, I got 6 months living expenses, revenue. I have enough revenue coming in to pay, got my insurance, and it was all, and then at the end of the day, something, somebody had told me before, I can't remember who it was. I can't take credit for this, but it was essentially like, you're leaving, what is your backup plan? Well, your backup plan is to do exactly what you're doing before this, if it all falls away. And that's not so bad. And so it's more or less like, also, you have to sometimes force yourself to be uncomfortable to grow. And that was really hard for me to because it's very uncomfortable leaving a stable job to do something that you're not sure if it's going to work out or not. And so, but that was kind of my plan at 10,000 foot view. So I'll kick it over to David.
Yeah. So I, being a recovering CPA, I have to comment on the numbers here. One metric that I was looking to hit was to replace my income by a factor of 2 to 3. And the reason for that, and let's just use some easy numbers. Say you're making 80 grand a year, and that's what you plan on taking out of the business when you fire the man. Well, if your net income is 80 grand and that's what you're going to pull out, you've got nothing left for reinvestment into new products, into inventory. And so by replacing your income by a particular factor, you will really set yourself up for both reinvestment and pulling money out of the business. And so that was one thing. And, Ken talked about the discomfort. That was something that when we first started our podcast, my game plan was I'm going to quit my job when the discomfort leaves. And it didn't ever leave. And it's still, honestly, I still have a little bit of discomfort. Like, what if this doesn't work out? And so what I did was I essentially laid out some metrics. Once I check all these boxes, one being the income that the business is producing, and then the savings and everything else. Once I hit that, doesn't matter if I'm uncomfortable or not, I'm just going to do it. And, one comment on insurance. I think corporate America does a really good job of dangling this carrot out in front of their employees and saying, listen, we have insurance. The only place you can get insurance is through us. And if you go try to do it on your own, it's going to be super expensive, and don't even bother. Spend the next 40 years working for us, and we'll give you a gold watch when you retire. And it's just like, that's it. Yes, it is. There are steps involved in getting insurance, but like, it was an easier process, I thought, than what corporate America makes it out to be.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And what's funny is the most popular video on my YouTube channel, the most views of all the videos I have, is one I did on insurance for self-employed people and walking through those options. And the reason I even know that is because I used to work doing training and recruiting for a health insurance agency. So after I left, I was just like, this is a question I know a lot of people, at least in the United States, are going to have. And to your point, there's more options than you realize you have. And regardless of anyone's feelings about the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, it actually opened up a few options for people to get insurance if they're self-employed without having to get underwriting and all that. So it actually created more options for people. So to your point, though, I think corporate America is still, yeah, but if you leave, you won't have health insurance. And when you really start doing the math, a lot of times your employer is paying like maybe $400 or whatever towards your health insurance a month. Like it's not this like grandiose thing like you're not going to have any insurance and no doctor will take you. No, you might just have to pay a little more, but there's options.
Absolutely. And one thing that we've talked about the risks of doing it, of quitting your job, of firing the man. I think one thing that people don't spend enough time on is, what are the risks of not doing it?
Yeah.
I mean, we are going to die. Fact. If you're not happy in your current position, you need to do something different. I mean, I've seen people spend a lot of time in jobs that they're miserable at. And I have a tough time with that. Why are you not taking steps to improve your situation? And so, what is the risk of staying at this dead end job for another year? Well, it's a percentage of your life. And so I don't know, not to be like dramatic about it, but it is dramatic. We're going to die. And so you need to put yourself in a position to enjoy life.
Yeah,
you're absolutely correct.
I don't know about you guys, but I think like something I've observed and it's happened to a lot of people I talk to in the space, in the entrepreneurship space, and I think sometimes it takes something that's very impactful to your life, a critical event, losing a loved one, something that like a crisis or something critical for you to make change. Because I think change is inherently hard for a lot of people. And if you're just like David said, what's the, people don't talk about what's the risk of not doing it. Like that's not talked about, and it should be. For me personally, I lost a friend of mine at a very early age, and it made me think like, oh wow, like, this guy was like 3 or 4 years older than me, and I'm like, he's gone now, and I'm like, and I was unhappy. I was commuting an hour one way, working for the government. It was a dog and pony show, and it was like there was not there wasn't a golden watch in my future, if you will. And so I was kind of like, yeah, like now's the time to make a big move. But yeah, I think it takes sometimes a critical event to make you realize and make change. What do you guys think?
Ken, now that you mentioned that, my critical event was having a kid. I remember when I was working, I had an hour commute back home at the end of the day, and like bedtime is a sacred time in my family. I like to, we have bath time, then we read stories and we go to bed. And there was a couple projects where somebody asked me to stay late. And prior to having children, I was like, no, sure. Yeah, I'll stay late. I'm a company man. And after having a kid, it was like, no, I'm not. I'm leaving right now. And if you want to fire me, that's fine. But like, this is at the top of my list in terms of priorities. And I will not stay late. Right. And that attitude is not, does not put you in line to get that golden watch or to be promoted.
Well, yeah. And that's one of the things that you start going down the rabbit hole in corporate America of trying to figure all this stuff out. And like, for me, that moment was, it was not a quick for me to fire the man. So it was 2010. My father had passed away from a brain tumor, and he wished that he had more of a career. Like, this is one of like the last conversations I had with him, and it really stuck with me. And I was thinking because he was an artist, and so like I guess maybe he envied the fact that I was working for like a large corporation, but I kind of felt like, why am I doing this? Like, I'm working really hard, and to use David's example of, hey, we need you to stay a little bit later to work on this project or whatever, and volunteering for stuff. What? So that instead of a 3% raise, I could get a 4 or 5% raise, or when I get promoted, I can get a 7 to 10% raise. Like, this is not all it's cracked up to be. And I just take on more responsibility and more stress in pursuit of all of this. And then my wife had been laid off she worked for a very large publishing company, doing sales, advertising sales for a large publishing company. And they just abolished her division just one day. Everybody walked in and thought they worked for this company. And then all of a sudden they're told, nope, we don't need you anymore. Thank you. And for some reason, that event got me listening to podcasts such as Smart Passive Income with Pat Flynn. And that led me down this path, which took me a long time to reprogram myself to like, oh wait, this could actually be possible to make a living doing these kind of things. And then eventually left my job in 2019. But yeah, I definitely agree that you have to have some sort of motivation. And I think people are having more of these motivations maybe in general the last few years, because I think like in 2010, if you had said to someone like, hey, I want to sell stuff on Amazon, like they would have thought you're crazy. Whereas like now I get people who I used to work with in corporate America just randomly messaging me on LinkedIn. Hey, I'd love to know more about what you do.
What?
Absolutely.
One, so in terms of like, I mentioned like being risk averse. If we were leaving our jobs and going into the piano tuning industry, that's a dying industry. That is risky. But getting into e-commerce right now, I mean, in my opinion, if e-commerce is a baseball game, we are in the second or third inning. I think it's like 1 in every 10 sales are made online. But you are seeing this giant pivot. You can now order a car online through Carvana, which I think is excellent. It's a better shopping experience. And to say that the e-commerce industry is going to do anything but grow over the next 10 years is ludicrous. And so I would say like, this is a very safe and growing industry to get into. And I think that is something that you need to consider. Is like, what's the growth trajectory here?
Yeah, it's a good point. Like right now is probably you missed the boat on if you were looking to build a store at the mall.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those days are fast behind us. So you guys have left the job, understand that the risk aversion. I think also the last couple of years has shown us that a lot of companies, if push comes to shove, they may tell you, you're everyone's family here, whatever. Doesn't matter how good of a job you are, how good of a rating you had with them, how much you were loved by your coworkers, what your performance was. If push comes to shove, you could be asked to take 9 months off. And when they're ready for you, they'll tap you on the shoulder if they feel like it and say, we'll have you back. And you're supposed to come back almost like begging. It was just kind of the vibe I got from a lot of people I know who were in jobs that basically had a 12-month pause. And so for those of us who now saying, you know what, let's get into the e-commerce and start looking for opportunities. I know you guys talked about, the international expansion, which is something I was excited to help you guys with. What has that process been like? Walk me through a little bit about when you're finding more customers in other places, how has that helped you, or however you'd like to go from there.
Sure. I'll get 10,000 foot view, and then I'll kick it to David for more numbers and details. So to kind of set the stage, I think it was probably, I don't know, 2 years ago. We had a conversation, Kevin, and we knew you would, you were international expansion expert, been selling on Amazon internationally for a long time. And, David and I, we had a conversation of like, hey, there's lots of different ways to grow a company. And so we were deciding using, David's number crunching powers, we were deciding on what's the most efficient way to expand our businesses over the next 12 months, 18 months. We had a bunch of options on there, and we whittled down the numbers, and international expansion kind of bubbled up to the top. And a couple of things, you really can just use the same products you already have, right?
Right.
You use Amazon, which has all the eyeballs as a channel, as a marketplace. Reviews poured over. There's some complexity, but not a ton. And it was for the most part, it was very quick of just turning those on, getting everything set up, and then instead of placing an order for 1,000 units from the supplier, you place an order for 1,500, and then you disperse them out to all these other marketplaces. So in that instance, there's not a ton of complexity involved, and the upside there was quite a bit. So that's kind of where we decided, and so I'll kick it over to David to kind of give you a snapshot of where we are today and kind of numbers and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that, as Ken mentioned, and let me get into product launches, and I'll circle back to international expansion. But I would say, in my experience, product launches, 3 out of 10 hit. They work out well. They sell well. 2 out of 10 do okay, and then you have 5 duds. And if anyone tells you that 10 out of 10 products they launch are doing awesome,
they're not counting the other 30.
Yeah, I mean, everyone has them, and so if you're looking at launching 10 products, you kind of have to factor that in. There's an element of unknown here, but for our hero products that we already knew sold really well, it was easier. Like it's kind of like a lazy man's way to expansion, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is less steps to take and less risk, and you can. So anyway, we went into UK, Germany, and Canada for our international expansion. And here has been our experiences so far. One, and I'm not just saying this because we're on the podcast, but when you're going through this process, call Kevin, because it was complicated. Like I remember German registration, it's in another language. I mean, good luck. And Kevin just took care of all of that and sent us all the information that we needed, and we were in good shape. That was an excellent first step. But in terms of those performance in these markets, I would say that Canada's been great. I'd say that represents probably between 5 and 10% of our sales, but we're still getting ramped up, still getting inventory in there, more of our SKUs in there. UK.
Is that 5-10% of your total sales, or for every dollar you make on Amazon, it's $5 to $10 in Canada?
Yeah, I would say that's relative to our Amazon US.
Okay, gotcha.
So
gotcha.
I would say Amazon US makes up 85% of our business.
Hmm.
And then 5% would be Canada, 5% UK, and 5% Walmart.
Okay.
And depending on the brand, plus or minus 5%. But generally, in what I would say is we were really concentrated in Amazon US.
Mhm.
And so when listings get taken down for some BS reason, you're diversified. Your listings in these other marketplaces they're going great. And so I would say Canada and UK have been the easiest because there hasn't been a language barrier. Also, getting products into the UK is a lot cheaper if you're sourcing out of China. And to be honest with you, we've kind of struggled with Germany getting products in. And I think that is more a function of us being newbies at getting products into that country, as opposed to a reflection of that marketplace or its potential.
So
Germany can be
kind of want,
a beast.
yeah, for sure. I
Sorry,
kind of want to, yeah, sure. I wanted to circle back around and speak to, just to be transparent and speak to, when we decided, hey, the international expansion was like the quickest way to more profitability, more sales, more market domination, more total world domination. Anyway, when we decided that, it was, we had two options. We can we can do it ourselves, or we can hire someone. And we made a pros and cons list, and the pros and cons list leaned about 90% on hiring someone, because it takes a lot of time. You're going to waste time getting to market. If it takes longer, there's a loss of opportunity. And so if you're thinking about doing that, list the pros and cons out and say, hey, what would happen if I try to do it on my own versus hiring somebody? And working with Kevin and his team was really amazing, to be honest. It was like, hey, what about, if we had a question to come up, shoot an email over, get a reply pretty rapidly. All the listings, getting set up, all the tools, Kevin and his team use some tools where, you collaborate on listings. And it was really, really, I would describe it as like a hand holding into the marketplace. And so, yeah, just a very positive experience. And so if you're thinking of doing it yourself versus hiring someone, I'm a huge fan of skipping the line, is what I call it. Paying for someone's experience and help. So I want to throw that out there.
I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Glad it was helpful for you. And I'm really glad to hear that you guys are getting those results. So Amazon Canada or Walmart US, which are you having better results in?
I would say it's about we've been in Walmart for longer, but I'd say it's about equal. One thing that we were doing was we were in NARF, North American Remote Fulfillment. Mm-hmm. And so we had a pretty good idea of what SKUs were selling well in Canada. And that was without 2-day shipping. And so when we were deciding, all right, what SKUs are we going to push into Canada? We pushed the ones that were selling through NARF, knowing that our conversion rate, that was one thing in NARF, our conversion rates would be like 2 to 3% because people had to wait 2 weeks to get their product. And now what we're seeing is our conversion rates have went from like 2 to 3% up to approaching 10% on a lot of our products, which that's huge. That makes everything easier. And so, but I felt like we were pretty calculated about it. Like, what are we taking up there? Because going back to my example of product launches, if you have a dud in the US, something that doesn't sell, it's probably not going to sell up there either. And so we kind of have went with what 20% of our products make 80% of the profit. We're going to be focused on those.
That makes sense, because if you know something works in NARF, then why not have it be FBA inventory? Because the customer gets it faster. They don't have to pay for additional shipping and additional duties to get it across the border. So it's a much better experience for the customer. So it tends to be more sales for the seller. So I heard you say basically it was about a 5x increase on conversions. Did that translate to a 5x sales increase, or was it more or less than 5x in sales wise, you think?
Yeah, I would say probably 5x. It also is probably a little too early to comment. I mean, we literally have shipments going in right now on some products that we haven't sold, but I would say, like, on the PPC side of things, we had products we weren't even running campaigns up in Canada on, just because of conversion rate. I mean, we monitor conversion rate very closely in our business. And when you have a 2 or 3% conversion rate, good luck running profitable PPC. It's just, there's not enough meat on the bone. And so anyway, that bump in conversion rate really makes things more profitable. And then you can start pushing PPC there.
Absolutely.
One thing to add on to that is, and a couple things we've had, our companies are in like very different verticals, very different niches, these brands. And so one of them we didn't think would do well in Canada. We were just kind of like, we actually waited. It was the last one where we sent in inventory, and we've had inventory in there now for, I think, the last month, and the numbers are coming back really incredible. We didn't expect it. I don't even know that we were focusing on PPC much for this brand, but once we saw the numbers come back, they were, incredible. And then on the Walmart side, one of our brands is running at about 15% of what it would do in .com. And so we didn't expect that either. And so, we heard a lot of people we've been talking to, everybody's kind of between that 6 and 8%. You can kind of expect that for Walmart. And when we saw 15%, we were just kind of like, wow, that's, so I think it also has to do with niche and brand, kind of what your feel and fit for the products into the marketplace. So yeah, I really only know, testing. So, but yeah, those were kind of shockers when we got inventory in there and saw those results.
Awesome. Well, you guys had mentioned PPC, so let's turn the conversation a little bit to PPC. How are things going for you in the PPC world? That seems like a perpetually hot topic in this business.
Yeah. So we had a speed bump, and then since then it's been going really well. But David, do you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple years ago, I read the book 4 Hour Workweek, and in that, Tim Ferriss describes where, when he was launching his supplements business, that 20% of his clients caused 80% of his headaches. And so he went ahead and fired those clients. And I remember reading that thinking like, oh, that makes sense. And we're a huge fan of the 80-20 rule anyway. Our company's called 80-20 Capital. And so bringing this back to PPC, we had went on an extensive search for a PPC agency. And this is not there. We've worked with great PPC agencies, and we were working with a very reputable one. But Ken had probably spent a month, and we had interviewed 10 or so agencies, and we were really trying to find our lifelong partner, right? Our who are we going to get married to in terms of like running our PPC for the next 5 to 10 years. And we found what we thought was the perfect mate. And as we got into it, we did see an initial bump, but our account manager was also managing about 20 other accounts. And so when it comes to attention to your account, if you have 40 hours in a week and you're managing 20 accounts, you're going to get 2 hours a week. And so we just didn't feel like we were getting the attention that we deserved or were paying for. And we had several meetings with our manager, and then we roped in eventually the owner of the business, and kind of laid out our complaints in terms of attention to the account and ad spend. And sure enough, we got fired. We at the end of that meeting, I was expecting him to say, "I'm sorry, we're going to address all of the issues that you laid out." But instead, it was a short email that said, "We're no longer interested in working with you." And
Oh, wow.
Ken,
Was it a little bit more friendly than that? Or we don't have to say the name of the agency or the owner or anything, but like, was it more like, thank you for bringing these to our attention, but maybe this just isn't a good fit? Or is it just, yeah, we don't want to work with you anymore?
it was blunt and to the point. And
Wow.
that also followed the tone of the meeting. Sometimes I'm the bad cop and Ken's the good cop. I was pretty fired up during that meeting. And so like I understand in hindsight why we got fired. But here's my second gripe. And this was with this agency, but it's with a lot of agencies, is you typically have a base price, the monthly fee, and then there's a kicker, which is generally a percentage of ad spend. And so if you think about it from an agency standpoint, they are incentivized to spend more because that makes you a more valuable customer. As a business manager, I am not interested in spending more most of the time. And so what was happening was we had a ton of break-even sales. We had sales that we were losing money on. And so it was kind of cutting in both directions, right? We were paying the PPC agency more every month, and we had unprofitable sales, which made it more challenging to pay that PPC agency every month. And so I dreamed of a scenario where we are compensating a PPC agency or individual based on profitability. And we pitched this idea to a bunch of different agencies, and all of them said no. And rightfully so, because there's a lot of things that go into profit. One, are you in stock? How are your listings? What types of products are you selling? And an agency can't be responsible for all of those things. I get it. So what we did, we made a big pivot after getting fired. Is we went out, we found somebody that had worked at an agency. They were a manager at an agency for about 5 years, and we brought them in-house. And this person has a base wage, and then they can increase that wage by up to 50% by hitting certain TACOS targets. TACOS being total advertising cost of spend. It's your ad spend divided by your sales. And that's been great. And so now we are fully aligned. Our interests are pointing in the same direction on we want to be profitable. They want to be profitable. And by implementing this, we've actually cut back ad spend by about 70% this year, which is huge. And we can put those dollars to work elsewhere in our company in terms of like hiring new team members, more inventory, more products. And it's kind of helped solve a cash flow crunch that we were in. And so anyway, that's the story of us getting fired.
So I want to back it up a little bit and talk to the other side of that. And so in that meeting that we had, just so anybody's interested, David was fired up because we had been getting poor service. And we hired this agency for Amazon PPC as well as Walmart PPC, and they weren't cutting it. It was not a good fit. David was fired up, and the meeting didn't go well. We get the email. I believe this was a Friday afternoon. So we had the founder on there. We had account managers. We had the PPC guy. It was like 6 of us on there. Meeting didn't go well. We got off the call. David was like fired up. And then I think it was like Friday at like 3 or 4. And then like later that night, that email comes in. And I saw it and I'm like, it's basically like, yeah, we're firing you. We don't want to work with you anymore. You have 2 weeks. And so here we are, we're in bed with this agency. We have all of our accounts. They're managing all of the accounts, Amazon and Walmart, and they're doing it in a software that I don't like. And so I'm like, oh my gosh. So yeah, we kind of went into crisis mode. David's like, I'm like, listen, like everything you said was accurate. This founder just doesn't want to deal with us as clients. And so he's made that choice. And I'm like, anyway, long story short, we kind of like worked it out a little bit to where we got more than 2 weeks of runway. And then we pivoted. David pulled up numbers and was like, if you're paying an agency this, you're getting 2 hours of time. It translates to, you're paying that agency a lot of money per hour. If you really think about it, you're only getting 2 hours of their time if they're managing, 19 other accounts. And so, so anytime, if you have an issue in a business, like it's not the end of the world, like just calm down, think about it, solve, come up with a plan, and implement that. And so I would say that was probably 6 months ago now. And on the other side of that, now we're managing all the PPC in house. We have one PPC manager across all the brands, and that person is amazing, PPC expert. And like David mentioned, I don't know what our profitability has went up, but it's went up a lot since we made that pivot. And so, maybe we could say, hey, David, chewing out this founder made us pivot into more profitable sales. And so, however you look at it, but
maybe it was a win-win for all parties involved. And so,
yes,
sometimes there's blessings in disguise and stuff like that. So what would you, if you were to succinctly describe your strategy for PPC, because you're cutting down, you said by like 70% on ad spend. So that might scare a lot of people.
Sure.
Describe that for us.
Let me take first crack at like 10,000 foot view, and then I'll kick it over to David.
You are definitely the 10,000 foot guy.
So that's my specialty. 10,000 foot view. And so as we're looking at our brands, we're expanding them and going into new marketplaces and new sales channels. We're looking at our marketing dollars holistically, where like Kevin O'Leary, if any Shark Tank fans, he sends a soldier out. Hey, bring back more soldiers. My dollar needs to go out and get more dollars. And so we're starting to measure these marketing channels: Amazon, Walmart, Google ads, Facebook ads, and figure out which ones have the best return for spending them. And so as we've really thought of it at that level, it really changed our strategy for how we attack Amazon. And so now I'll turn it over to David for the deeper on Amazon PPC.
Yeah, so I'm going to illustrate this with an example of, say, a product that sells for $10, costs you $3, and say you have $4 in Amazon FBA fees and referral fees. All right, so your net profit is $3 or 30% on this particular product. Traditionally, our experience would be, at least what the agencies were instructing us, is when you're bidding on keywords, bring your A costs all the way up to 30%, sometimes even higher. You are knowingly making break-even sales. You're kind of like a hamster running in a wheel. And the reason for that is that's going to drive organic sales, which we love organic sales. And we followed that for a while. And what we found was that we were selling at break-even a lot. And so what we've done is, on every product, we know what our break-even point is. And so in this example, it's 30%. We will subtract 5 to 7% on that. And that's our target A cost. So on this 30% profit margin product, we may target, say, like a 22% A cost. And are you going to miss out on some sales? Sure. But guess what? They're break-even sales, and that, we're in the business of producing net income. And so I'm not interested. In fact, it's more work because your inventory turns over faster.
Right,
you got to go out and order more.
Go out and replace that inventory.
Right. And so what we've seen, since we've made that move, every week we have a PPC meeting, and there are a couple metrics that we're heavily focused on. One is, what is our percentage of organic sales to overall sales? And as we've cut ad spend, we've seen our organic sales go up. And this is a topic called
sales or percentage of sales go up.
We've seen our percentage of sales. That's
okay,
I'm glad you pointed that out. And so when we were running really heavy PPC sales were probably made up 70% of our business. As we've cut ad spend, we're seeing that number be between 40 and 50%, meaning we have 50 to 60% of our sales being organic, which are very profitable. And so it introduces this topic of cannibalization, where if Amazon's going to have the option to put you on page one organically, or you can pay to be on page one, they're going to always choose the option where you're paying. And so that has been a move that we have been, that has worked out really well. The other thing is looking at gross profit after PPC. So if you think of your P&L, you've got sales minus cost of goods sold, equals gross profit.
Mhm.
And what we'll do is then we'll just subtract out PPC, which usually sits down in operating expenses. But
Mhm.
in monitoring that, and that has been really helpful in understanding the types of products that we have and how much we can spend on them. We have some products that the ratio of our purchase price relative to what we can sell them at is very high. They're very profitable products. So we can afford to spend a little bit more on PPC.
Right.
We have some that are not. And so it's just, we've kind of had more of a targeted approach on a product by product basis. And I would also, going back to bringing a PPC manager in house, we've been able to be a lot more nimble because they are spending 40 hours a week on our accounts. And so if we're running low on stock, we may cut back on ad spend to slow down sales so we don't stock out. If we're out of stock, we can have her turn off all of our campaigns. And with an agency like those moves that we're making every week, we weren't able to do that. I mean, generally they would run our account, but like, hey, turn this campaign on, turn this campaign off. Hey, slow down sales here. We really have a lot more levers in our control.
Okay, gotcha.
so-
So it's been beneficial for you, it sounds like, to do it on your own.
Yes. And
Okay.
so tacos is a number we pay a lot of attention to. And it's going to be different for every brand, but I would say a blended average of 10% tacos has been what we have found to be our sweet spot for profitability. And so again, it depends on the price of your products and how much you sell them for, but like just to give a general data point, that is what we have found to be a great fit.
Got it. Well, interesting. So you guys have definitely made some major moves. Another major move you guys had, just to kind of close out here, is you guys have done things a little differently. Is, everybody's trying to figure out that laptop lifestyle, 4-hour work week. Although anyone who's actually read 4-hour work week knows he never actually worked a 4-hour work week. He was working like an 80-hour work week. He was describing in the book. But one of the things you guys did was take over some of the, we'll say, light manufacturing. So, and taking over some of the warehousing as opposed to having a 3PL or a prep center. How has that been for you?
Ken, you want to take this, or
David, go for it.
All right. It's been going well. So right in the middle of COVID, we, like everybody else, were having major supply chain issues and decided that it was going to be the best move to take, or just take over a portion of our manufacturing. And so we actually ended up buying a warehouse, and this was in the middle of all the inventory restrictions. And so we were able to trickle in inventory, which was that was nice. But anyway, yeah, we've, for one of our brands, we've taken over manufacturing. I would say we're manufacturing about 90% of our products and are producing somewhere around 4,000 to 5,000 units a month. And it's been going well. What I'll tell you is typically your manufacturers are making 20 to 30% profit margin, and boy, are they earning it. There's some carrying costs of raw materials that you don't have when you're just ordering finished goods. You have tooling that breaks down. You've got employees that you need to add to payroll. And so it hasn't been without its issues, but I haven't found anything in business that's easy. There's always a challenge, and it's just, we're in the business of solving problems. And so I've really enjoyed it. And it's been a good move for our business. And then in terms of being nimble, if we have a product really take off and we're running low on stock, we can produce more units that day and get them sent in. And so our in-stock rate has went from probably around like 80% up to 99%. And that's great. I mean, we're in the business of selling inventory, and when you don't have any inventory, good luck.
Yeah. One thing to kind of add on to that, and Kevin, we were kind of talking about it before the show, is kind of like, this game has gotten more difficult over the years since we started, right? And so being able to compete, it's getting more difficult. The shoebox and the backpack, that stuff's kind of out the window. It's not working anymore, and so you have to find different, unique ways to differentiate. And I think, like we discussed before, this like manufacturing, some of the stuff that David was saying, like we can get product launch if we find a product, as long as we can get raw materials quickly, or even if we can make something out of what we have, we can get a product in within 5-7 days and testing it really quick. We can go to market really fast. If we're selling out, we actually do our production runs weekly. So whatever we sell the week before, we're just putting it back in there. So as long as we have a really good, supply of raw materials. So yeah, it just gives you that extra little edge against your competition.
Yeah, because the competition oftentimes isn't doing these things. So like I am what looks like probably a bedroom on, if people are watching the video portion of this, I'm actually in an office, and I've got an office in the front, a couple offices in the front and a warehouse in the back. And I've got some machines. And so I'm able to do small tests as well to try out new products and not have to order from China and wait, for the product to be delivered. I could theoretically say, I want to test something out on Monday, ship it into Amazon's warehouse. If everything aligns properly, I could have it for sale on Friday if they check it in fulfillment center transfer and all that fun stuff. But theoretically, I could be making sales on that product on Friday. So when you think about it, if you can make tests and potentially carry less inventory, which also is going to help your cash flow, you give yourself a competitive advantage that folks that have, half of their cash essentially sitting on a boat in the Pacific.
Yeah, absolutely. We found it to be a good move for this particular business, and we'll probably be looking for other ways to involve manufacturing somehow as we go forward. But yeah, it's just finding that happy balance between time and what you want to spend your time on. So.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be manufacturing from raw material to finished good. It could be taking over one step of the process, so that, I was finding I had a prep center that was doing some of the prepping of some of my goods, and I'm saving money right there. So just what I'm paying additionally in rent helps me there. And I also have the cash flow advantage of not having to order as much at a time. Because I can have a little bit more control on which levers I pull for which products, because some of them are seasonal and things like that. So yeah, lots of good benefits with all that. So for folks who want to learn more from the two of you, where should they go?
Check us out at firingtheman.com, on social media at firingtheman. And if you have any questions, or go to our website and there's a microphone, you can leave a question. Be happy to respond.
Yeah, I mean, appreciate having both of you on. You both have continued to grow and progress in your journeys, and that's been awesome to see. And look forward to maybe having you on in another couple of years to talk about where you're at that point and the progression and what you're crushing it on. So thank you very much, guys. And it's been fun chatting.
All right. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks.